So welcome everybody. Prithpal Bhogill. I'm a product manager within the Google Cloud Apogee team, and I'm going to be joined today with my partner in crime, Brancato from Citrix, who'll be up here shortly. So today we're going to talk about how to fuel an insights-driven API program. Just a quick show of hands. How many out here are working with APIs or have some kind of an API program? OK, quite a bit. And how many out here are dealing with any kind of operations around APIs, whether it is just monitoring, security, et cetera? OK, a few of them. Awesome. So today we'll kind of cover a few different areas on the aspects of API operations. I think it's an area which is taking a lot of importance, especially as customers grow viral with the APIs. And so there is a app where you can provide feedback. So at the end of the session, if you can take maybe a couple minutes to provide some feedback, that'd be great. So let's get right into it. We have seen that there's been a big evolution with APIs. They used to be access agents of access, which means you have APIs, they expose some kind of data, and some kind of consumers, applications, and users who are using the applications are accessing them. But lately, we have seen many, many enterprises trying to become digital. And when they talk about becoming digital, what they really mean is that they are using APIs to provide their products or capabilities. So really, APIs are going through a big revolution of their own, where they're becoming agents of digital transformation. So this is something which is not just a myth, but we have several successful enterprises who are actually able to rapidly accelerate their digital transformation efforts leveraging APIs. Let's take a look at a few different examples. So Pitney Bowes is an amazing customer, big enterprise, and they've been able to, using APIs, leverage some ways to integrate the backend assets and data and expose them in a very agile way. They've actually been able to reduce the development time from 18 months to about 4 months. In today's day and age, that speed becomes the differentiator between one enterprise and the other. You have another bank in Indonesia, Bank BRI. They are doing something very amazing. They're actually taking a network of small-scale microfinance-based schemes and being able to kind of light up millions and millions of customers. And they're actually using APIs to be able to not only offer these services, but monetize these assets in a way that is tangible revenue for themselves, and powering some very interesting ecosystems. Another bank here in the island area, delivering open banking capabilities. All these are very legitimate examples of real-world enterprises becoming digital. And so let's do a small thought experiment. How many out here in the room feel that APIs are all about technology? Not a single one? OK. Then maybe you guys know a lot more than many others. APIs are, of course, a very technical way of representing data, exposing those assets. But there's a very pressing need to be able to manage APIs as a business. And really, APIs are becoming the ways many enterprises are unlocking real value from the assets, whether they are legacy assets or modern assets, and are using the APIs to be able to extend that ecosystem out to their partners, to their customers, to their employees. And managing your APIs has become a very important aspect, just because APIs are the way they are transacting the capabilities. So to manage your APIs as a business takes a small shift, which involves both mindset and some aspects of the culture. typically, when we hear about shifts in technology, it's also preceded with shifts in the people who use the technology and certain kind of processes. But if you start thinking about APIs as the core asset which gets monetized, as some of the examples showed you, or which becomes the primary core means by which you transact business, you have to start thinking about, how do I go beyond serving the needs of the developers who are building the APIs? How do I really go beyond thinking about just the API gateway that I can use to be able to very securely expose my APIs? And how do I really go beyond the entire API lifecycle, which does get data out from a legacy assets in a more modern digital way outside? Let's start thinking about what upstream impact an API can really have. So think about, you've made a commitment to APIs, we've become API enabled, and you're using that to kind of present capabilities, as many enterprises have begun to do. API operation starts to become a very important aspect. So imagine you have an ordering API which powers a mobile application where any of your customers can actually use that API to order something. So what happens if that API slows down or has suddenly a high amount of error rate? Well, the value chain in the API development and API consumption now starts to have a very, very big upstream effect. Your customers get affected. Your employees, an ecosystem of partners perhaps that you may have affected by APIs, start getting affected in a real-time and meaningful way. Any outage can actually have an immediate brand impact and could be a differentiator between success of your enterprise versus the other. So what does this really do for many of the operations and the compliance teams who are tasked with the responsibility of actually keeping the lights on? For API operators, they want to be able to very quickly understand, are my APIs up and running? Are they performing as they should? And more importantly, if something does go wrong, do I have the ability to be able to diagnose and get to the root cause very quickly? On the other hand, you have security operations and security compliance teams tasked with trying to ensure that the APIs are secure. If they're exposing some critical data, you want to make sure that they have the right level of access and are only accessible by the audience who's supposed to, and keep away all the rogue actors out of the API platform. So that brings a very unique challenge. And we're going to take a look at how many enterprises are successfully leveraging the vast amount of API data that actually travels through the API platform. So we have seen a shift that some of the enterprises are making. They're going to the next level of not only providing APIs, but trying to figure out ways to eke out the most amount of value from the API data that flows through the platform. So let's take a quick peek at that. Of course, as Google Cloud, you've heard about how we provide a set of amazing, differentiated artificial intelligence and machine learning capabilities. So at Apogee, we have decided to harness the power of those technologies and bring AI and ML to API operations. So you've seen this digital value chain many a times, where it's all about how APIs should be designed with consumption in mind. And now you have this big data stream from APIs which is generated. So using AI and ML technologies, we're actually able to now provide 3 new capabilities. This was just announced last week. We are calling this area API operations. And today we'll talk about at least 2 high-level capabilities around anomaly detection and some advanced security reporting capabilities. So API operations, we feel, is the most critical element in the future of managing your API operations and staying on top of your most mission-critical APIs. So let's talk a little bit about the first aspect of using AI and ML within the API platform. So I want to do a quick thought experiment here. How many out here in the audience are Google Nest users? A few? Or perhaps you may be using some kind of alarm system or whatever. And many a times, if you are doing everything right in your day, in the morning, you leave the house, you close the door, and you set an alarm, and you take off, right? Have there been instances when you have forgotten to set the alarm? Anyone? Quite a few? OK. So just imagine you've got a very disciplined operations team. You have all bases covered. But what if suddenly there were new APIs which were developed by some new team members who weren't aware of setting the right alerts and thresholds? Or a new version of an API was just rolled out, and suddenly that changed the characteristic, either in terms of a high error rate or suddenly high latency, which was never heard of before. Anomaly detection is a perfect example of how we use AI and ML to be able to let the platform automatically detect any anomalies in your API traffic and flag it to you as the operator, so you are aware of certain things which happen before they become a bigger problem. So in the demo today, Adam will walk us through how Citrix is using anomaly detection to be able to stay on top of their API operations in a much more proactive way. Of course, you can always have alerts which fire when a threshold is crossed. But wouldn't it be nice for you as an operator to be able to become aware before things go really bad? OK? The second feature is around advanced security reporting. So traditionally, as an API platform, we have catered to the needs of API developers and application developers and even product managers fairly well. With API monitoring, API operations and the ops teams actually have the tools to be able to diagnose, process whatever information they need to be able to stay on top of API operations. With advanced security reporting, we are actually able to meet the requirements of many of our customers, especially who are members of a security or a compliance team. They usually have requirements around things like who is using the platform and what exactly are they doing with the platform. Are they accessing information that they're really supposed to? They want to be able to have a nice audit trail of that information. Secondly, they also want to ensure that if they have come up with some kind of enterprise architecture or corporate standards around using specific kind of security policies in the APIs, they actually want to know that those policies are being used. So if the design time governance aspects of the APIs are actually being met. And lastly, it's great that you have an API, but what if it's running on a non-secure port? That's not really a good thing. So with the advanced security reporting capabilities, we actually have, in the beta announcement that we just made last week, the ability for customers to be able to have the security and ops teams take a closer look at some of those facets. So this beta rollout is going to be phased for customers over the next few weeks. And they'll be able to start leveraging some of these capabilities. So with that, I will like to invite Adam, who will take us through the next few slides.
Thanks. Hello, everyone. My name is Adam Brancato. I am one of the app development managers at Citrix. Just start off by letting you guys know a little bit about what we do at Citrix. So as everyone knows, nobody works today the way they worked 20 years ago, 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago. So Citrix really is focusing on unifying our apps, your apps, data, et cetera, files, everything like that in secure digital workspaces so people can work anywhere, anytime on any device, whether it be tablet, laptop, terminal, et cetera, in a secure manner. You can see we're all over the world, lots of customers, lots of partners, et cetera. The big thing we're focusing on now is employee experience, managing the employee experience, making sure everyone can see all their notifications in one spot, all the access and apps that they need to access. We're here. We have a booth outside, so if you'd like more information, feel free to stop by, find out about the great stuff we're doing in Workspace. And the last thing I'll say is we are our own customers. So before we roll out builds and products, we actually use them internally. I work on these products every day as part of my job. All right, cool. So I'm going to start off by talking about some of the business drivers of why Citrix needed an API platform and why we were looking for an API platform. Some of these high-level items were easily and securely exposing data. You'll notice that it says internal and external customers. So we have a lot of outside partners that need access to our data, or we give them access, but also there's a fair amount of internal teams, such as the Citrix Cloud team, the Workspace team, that needs customer information, contact information, et cetera. So we wanted a way to easily expose this, whether it be internal or external. As many people here probably know, we have a large variety of technologies. Anyone who's been doing development for quite some time, you could have an old, SOAP service, and then all the stuff you're writing today is, these great, wonderful REST APIs. So Apogee, or an API platform, lets the consumers not worry about what technologies are behind the scenes. It's exposed through a consistent facade. And the last couple items, we were looking for some data aggregation from multiple sources. So we have several APIs, and sometimes you don't want your apps and consumers to have to call 5 APIs or 5 different systems. So an API platform would allow us to manage this data, make several asynchronous calls, things like that, combine them into one response, so the users don't have to worry about all of those different systems that are connected behind the scenes. And finally, obviously, reporting and monitoring. Prithpal talked a bit about the monitoring, and we're going to definitely go in depth about that. We wanted something easily built-in monitoring, custom monitoring, reporting, et cetera. So we've been working with Apogee for about 5 years now. I started with a simple POC where we needed to allow e-commerce vendor of ours to supply licenses on the fly. So we have a division of small businesses that we work with that come through some of these third-party sites, and they just want to instantly deliver Citrix licenses to them, and that's kind of where it started. And now we have over 40 production APIs. Some of the great benefits we've had is, so for example, you'll see Salesforce is listed up here. So things like Salesforce, we can centralize access to that through these API platforms and expose out that data. So whether you own the back end or it's a third party like Salesforce or another system, you can run it all through Apogee on the platform. One of the big things we wanted also is it's simple for our developers. We want our developers to be able to focus on developing and creating great stuff. So not having to worry about too much about hosting and ops and all that stuff. Let them focus on development. So we'll talk about some of the business outcomes that we've had since we've been using Apogee, the API platform. Onboarding times are greatly reduced. So we've had older legacy systems that used AD accounts for consumers to access some services, or a variety of old technologies for anyone that's been working in API or service development for quite some time. It was really hard to onboard and set up these new accounts, but something like API keys or an API platform literally took that from sometimes weeks or days down to a few minutes. You don't have to be technical to add access for someone. You have a couple admins, they go in and just boom, turn it on. You see we have 90% of performance improvement for Citrix.com. So one of the biggest things or accomplishments that we had is we have several apps on Citrix.com. They access APIs, but what we noticed is one of the biggest services we use is roles and authorization. So what would happen is someone would log in and say, okay, I want to add a contact, right? So that app would have to check, does Adam have access? It would go make a call to get the roles. Then after I add a contact, I would have to go and say I want to renew a license or something like that. Well, the licensing app would make that same call as well. And what we noticed was, as a customer browsed around our site and completed the test, that it was just over and over hitting that same API. And instead of pushing that to the consumers to have to handle caching and things like that, we literally solved that problem in about 10 minutes. So Apogee has front-end caching. So what's really cool about that is the first time a customer logs in, it gets their roles, and then another app accesses that same API. They don't have to do anything. Apogee caches it. We save the call to the back end. So, a call that took a few hundred milliseconds, maybe longer for some of our larger customers, was down to 48, 50 milliseconds with literally dropping a shape in a workflow in about 5 minutes. So some of the other things we've done is we've migrated legacy services, and the consumers don't even know about it. So what's great about having a facade on the front end on top of our services is once we decide, okay, hey, great, we have time to rewrite this legacy service or whatever's on the back end, the consumer doesn't have to know about it. They just keep accessing it through the same facade. So one of the other big benefits that Prithpal talked about was this near zero setup time for a lot of this monitoring and DevOps items. So Apogee has, the AI and machine learning that Prithpal talked about that just does it for you. If a developer doesn't have to worry about, okay, I've deployed my API, now I have to work with the ops guys, and they have to set up special monitoring. There's definitely times where we'll set up custom alerts and things like that, but out of the box, it's all right there with very minimal or zero effort. And finally, what this allows for us to do is we can investigate hot issues in real time. Right? As they're occurring, you can look at stats, you can look at errors, you can look at latency, and there's a lot of great dashboards, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. Cool. So why did we choose Apogee? For all those things we just talked about. We really like the platform. It's got great security, and we focus on security at Citrix. So, that's important to us. Easily secure access to our APIs. There's the reporting, the monitoring, and it's really simple UI for developers to use. The onboarding time is super fast, and Apogee has a bunch of these great features. You can see that, we use our own products. We have Citrix NetScalers that connect securely. We create secure two-way SSL, and Apogee has their own, AI and bot defenders working that we don't even have to set up. They have cool features such as Honeypot, where if they detect some attacks, they'll create fake data to return to the attackers and things like that, and our APIs stay protected. So it's a really cool platform that we like. It's highly customizable. They're using the latest technologies and always on the cutting edge. And if you make friends with guys like Prithpal, you get early access to this stuff to try it out, and it's, a lot of cool, fun stuff. So I'll take you through some of the stuff that we're doing with Apogee and show you guys around a little bit. All right, cool. So this is the Apogee web interface. Just before we get into some of the monitoring and items like that, I'll show you guys a bit around how the platform works in general. So there's this whole list of proxies here, for example. So here it shows all the proxies that we are currently utilizing. Let's look at the contact one. So I click on that, and it just brings me in here into the main page, which has some URL setups and things like that. Now, one of the really cool things about Apogee that I like is there's a built-in, we'll call it source control in a sense, right? So you can see there's revisions here. So what a developer does is, let's say I say, hey, I'm going to need you to add a new feature to this API. They go in, they create a new revision, they could work on that. You can deploy different revisions to different environments. So that way, they mess something up, they're only messing it up in the development environment. It's not going to, the further advanced environments. So speaking of environments, you'll see here I'm logged into, Citrix WWOps Dev. So one of the other really cool things is you get multiple orgs and organizations and environments. So this is a non-production one. You can segregate your non-production, your production environment, and then inside of that actual organization, as they call it, you'll see we have dev, pre-prod, staging, test. There are various environments that we use. Makes things really great, and it's also walled off from production. We have other teams at Citrix that are using Apogee, and they have their own orgs. So, us for our app team, we're in one org. Our cloud guys who are starting to expose their APIs for Citrix Workspace, they are in their own org. We don't bother each other. We don't break each other. It's a really cool feature. So real quick, I'll just kind of show you what a proxy looks like. So you hit this develop tab here. You can see it's very workflow oriented. So here you can see you just drop shapes. You need to verify API key security. You literally just drop these shapes in, basically XML shapes, easy configuring. You can do really, really simple stuff like this by dropping in shapes, or if you want to get really advanced, you can create custom JavaScript code. You can do all kinds of stuff like that. Here we make some call outs to what's called shared flows, which is basically a way to create centralized, recallable, or reusable bits of code from multiple proxies. So a lot of cool stuff, really easy to use. We like the interface a bunch. Cool. All right. So now let's get into analytics and monitoring a bit. So the first thing we will start with is we'll go here to this dashboard. So when we start with monitoring, one of the things you can do, now this is our test environment, one of our dev environments, so it's cool because there'll be lots of broken things. You guys can see what that all looks like when things are broken. So as I switch my hat, as we call it, over to the DevOps side, how someone would come in, or one of our DevOps guys, they would come in, maybe take a look at this in our production environment. They could see, a summary of the traffic over here. They could see an error rate. The average error rate's 32%. Really like to break our test environment. So you can see latency here too, that, wow, look at this. It'll show you here that, this case service, something's going on because it really shouldn't be taking 55 seconds, for example. So this is a great way for an ops guy to come in real quick and just say, all right, let me see what's going on here. Let me see what the top potential problems could be. And we didn't set any of this up. Like, we didn't have to do anything to make this dashboard work. This comes out of the box like this. And we get this report right here so they can kind of dive down, deep dive into, see what's going on. So we'll go over here to the Events tab. So the Events tab is going to show me two things. One, it's going to show me alerts. So we can set up alerts, which are pre-configured items of items that we want to be notified about. So, you can see a bunch of these here. There's some latency items that we set up. But now, let's go back a little further. You'll notice that there is this other tab that says Anomaly. So if I click on that, this is going to show you what the AI found. So we didn't set any of this up. This is the AI and machine learning that says, hey, we noticed that, over a certain amount of time, there's been an increase, or there's been 500 errors that are being returned by the API. Maybe this is something you want to look into or see what's going on. Maybe there's a problem. In a production environment, obviously it's great to, see this right away without having to configure it. And it even flags these things as the severity, right? So here you see one these are all moderate. And you can see here, this one that marked it as slight. So maybe this one's not as high a priority, based on its own, AI capabilities and machine learning. It's trying to, figure out how important some of these are. That's just a little latency versus an error count, right? So I'll click on one of these. And this is going to kind of drill down how a DevOps guy would go in and say, okay, notice this anomaly. What's going on? Let's take a look. So immediately they come in here and it'll give you some piece of information immediately. So you can see US East 1 is the region. So with Apogee, you can have multiple regions. So we have an East and a West region. This immediately tells us, hey, this is isolated to that East region. Now, if you go down here, you can see from, about 8:45 to 9 o'clock, something happened, right? So what's going on? So down here, right now, we're looking at the proxy. So this is one of our account proxies. So if I click here, it's going to show me, okay, here's what's going on. Here's the environment. Here's the fault code. The source is the target. So what the target is our actual back-end service. So this is telling us, hey, the back-end service that the API platform is reaching out to is what's causing the error. You could also see something here like proxy, which means something is failing inside the workflow of that proxy. And again, we see the region, the status code, et cetera. So what's interesting also is we can see the distribution by app. You can see it says Citrix Cloud Platform. So we can see that it's something that our cloud team is calling. Maybe they're sending bad parameters, or maybe we're not handling something properly. It gives us, right here, hey, here's who's calling this, here's who's seeing the errors, and also it gives us the backend URL as well. All right here. We didn't have to do anything to set this up. You can also over here, you can see we're showing the name of the proxy, but you can look at a bunch of different dimensions, the fault policy, if there was one that triggered, which is Apogee's error handling, the proxy, the fault code itself. You can see this error message right here, error response code. So there's a lot of different views you could look at, et cetera. And then finally, I can click over here on the logs, and I can actually look at some of these traffic logs. And okay, so this tells me the response time was 60 milliseconds, et cetera. And I can expand this. I could see the URL that they're posting to. So this right here is the actual API URL to Apogee. So it tells me what they're hitting. There's a message ID in here, virtual hosts, which is basically Apogee allows you, this is pretty cool, to set up custom URLs and route them through Apogee. And again, some more details around the source and the fault code, et cetera. And I could look at all of these requests if I wanted to. And again, I didn't have to do anything to set this up. This is just in this, investigate dashboard inside the event hub, et cetera. And then also, let me go back in here real quick again as well. So the other thing we did talk about, I'm going to go back to events real quick, is you saw some of those alerts. So how those alerts work is you can actually also take those anomalies that we just created, and you could tell it to, okay, create an alert for me based on this factors and these settings. Let me just go back to that. So if you come back in here, you'll see that there is a button that says create alert, edit alert, et cetera. So create alert, if I was to do that, it would let me configure it so I could have it, put a description in, set some thresholds here, which it automatically pulls in from that anomaly. And then I could tell it to email me, and there's several other channels it can use to notify you. So for example, this is what one of these emails looks like, right? So, okay, this is one that triggered yesterday, and what's pretty cool here too is you get this, it tells you some of the summary details and things like that, and then if I hit this view event button to see what triggered it, it's actually going to bring me right into that investigation screen that we're at earlier. So it's pretty cool. It allows you to close the loop, set up these alerts, and then come back in and look at them. So the next thing I want to talk about is security. So we take security very seriously. I'm sure that's important to everybody. So there's these new security reporting dashboards and features that we've been utilizing lately at Citrix to kind of keep an eye on things. So if you go here, this is our security reporting overview dashboard, and it just gives you some high-level stats here. This is for the last 24 hours. And you can see it lists out the environment. So proxies, 23 active out of 57. If you remember earlier, I showed you, hey, here's a list of all our APIs in this environment. So this is telling me that out of those 57 that we have in this development environment, that 23 of them were active. Then we have these shared flows, which I mentioned earlier. They're reusable workflows that you can call from your other proxies, which I love. We use them all the time. You can see the amount of traffic, 115,000 calls, et cetera. And it tells you by environment as well, so you can kind of get an overview of what's going on. And This right here shows us the region breakdown. You can see a lot of the offices and a lot of us that are developing are on the East Coast, so most of our traffic and what we're doing is going through the East region. And here as well, if there were some fault codes, it was, if I expand this, we'll probably see some of that stuff, but it would show us some of these codes. There's some categories you can mess around with and configure, et cetera, and they would all show right in here. So next, we're going to go to this runtime. So what this runtime report does, which is actually really cool, so there's all these policies that are inside these proxies, right? So if I come to one of these and I click on this, this is going to give me an overview of what's going on runtime-wise, right? So here, I can see that all this traffic is coming over HTTPS, which is good because the security guys are always going to be on me about that. You know, as many companies, there's always audits, so we want to make sure we're doing things over HTTPS, you know, all the time. And this right here gives us a high-level breakdown of all the different, you can see here, these are all the developers and consumers that called this. We can see who's accessing it, the amount of traffic. These are these virtual hosts that you configure in Apogee, and again, we can see who's using them. Now, if we go to configuration, that's going to load, and then this is going to show me all the policies for this specific proxy. So there's three kinds of policies. There's traffic management, security, and then the last one we have is what's known as extension, which allows you to run custom code and do a lot of configurations of requests and responses, et cetera. So I'm going to show you all of them. And what you can see here is we can go in and we can take a look at what these policies are, how many are configured in each one, right? So something that a security person might want to be looking at is like, okay, so security policies, for example, which are these API key verifications, et cetera. You would come in here, you could say, okay, all right, these guys are all using them. All right, so what's going on here? Why is this one not have any security policies? The security guys don't have to go through all the proxies and like click around to make sure. They get a nice high-level report here, as well as these shared flows that I talked about. You can make sure and verify that people are using these shared flows, and also the HTTPS over here. So you can see, great. This proxy, for example, is non-HTTPS enabled, so it's something the security guys would want to look at. And then if I click in detail, it shows me exactly like, okay, this is using the verify API key. There are some policies around special characters, and then these little funky looking radar things, graph things, these are call outs to shared flows that we talked about. So it's very easy to come in here, get an overview of that, click on the shared flow, shows you some authentication stuff. And let's say security has their own dashboards that they want to create and merge in with some of their other reporting that they have on their own side. One of the other really cool things about this platform in general is basically anything that you can do inside of the UI, you can access through an API as well. So it allows all of the data about your proxies, your policies, the security, you can access it with an API, which is really cool because you can create your own reports, but also, let's say you want to integrate it into your own, CI/CD pipeline and something like Jenkins or whatever. You can make API calls to deploy your APIs, pull information, et cetera, et cetera. So, and then the last thing we're going to talk about is user activity. So the user activity tab, I'm not going to click on because it has a bunch of information about our users. So instead, I have sort of a blacked out screenshot. You guys can hopefully see that. So what this does right here is this will tell me, so up top here, this lists out what people are doing in the UI. So there's usernames and email addresses listed here. So it would list out those users, what they're doing in the UI, and if they're making any API calls. And then if you click on one of those users, you can get a detailed breakdown of what their actual activity is. So for example, here you can see they're going in, doing something with the organizations, the environments, and then you can get exact request paths and what they're doing. So all in all, a lot of cool stuff, and most of it we didn't even have to set up. It was all there already for us. So, all right, that's my time for the demo. I'm going to call Prithpal back up here. He's got a couple more things to tell you guys about. Thanks.
Thanks, Adam. That was really awesome. So hopefully you folks got a taste of a few different things that we went through. One was around anomaly detection and how those kind of capabilities lets operators really stay on top of the API operations and without worrying about, did I set the right alert? Did I configure it in time? So the system watches out for you. Anomaly detection and the advanced security reporting capabilities, as you just saw, are just few of the features which were announced last week as part of API operations. Going forward, API operations is also going to include features such as API testing and SLO reporting, which will give customers even more insights into other business-oriented aspects of their APIs. So I think anomaly detection gives us a very brief insight into how we can leverage and harness the power of AI and ML and really make API operations a breeze for many of our customers. Today, you saw that it's actually using those technologies to stay on top of operations more from a systems level. As we start to roll more and more of these capabilities out through the platform, we are planning on covering use cases around security and other business aspects as well. So using AI and ML, we were able to predict many anomalies, such as a few that Adam kind of walked us through today. So that's something which is here for customers to try as we speak. So what's in store for us tomorrow? Just think about and do a slight thought experiment where, in many cases, as Adam mentioned, the API platform is actually front-ending many of the back-end APIs or targets. Of course, you can have the API platform where you can configure the right level of traffic management policies to be able to ensure that only the right amount of workload or traffic goes to the back-end. But if there was a catastrophic failure in the back-ends, typical change management policies within many enterprises takes some cases minutes and hours. If you were to go through all the APIs and change the traffic management policy to allow maybe a tenth of the normal workload to the backends because your backends are failing, by the time you affect all that, your backends probably are in a state which can't be recovered. So the suggested operator controls is another future-looking feature which you're working on, which gives the ability and control in the hands of operators to be able to, using a dial button, kind of lower the amount of API traffic flowing through the platform just for that period of time, right? So it gives more powerful contextual controls to be able to affect and control things at the right time. And lastly, taking this thing a step further, using AI and ML, we are then able to leverage some of these capabilities and have the system, the platform, potentially self-heal. And what that means is, instead of the alert that Adam just showed that could be set up manually, if the system detects with a high degree of accuracy that there's been an anomaly, the very next thing to do would be to be able to set an alert with the right notification channel and notify the affected personas. So with that, we have about 6 minutes for Q&A. I would like to welcome Adam back out here on stage. And if you have any questions, a few of our colleagues out there in white T-shirts have microphones. We'll be around for the next 5.5 minutes, and we'd be more than happy to take any questions that you folks may have.
Yeah, do you have a question?
So when it detects an anomaly, for example, you are not expecting any more than, let's say, 3,000 proxy requests a minute, for example, and suddenly it shoots up to 15,000 requests a minute. Can the anomaly detection, apart from alerting and maybe based on events and stuff like that, can it also take an action to say, oh no, something has gone wrong here. I'm going to shut the API down, or I'm going to proxy it off to a different region, for example. Lots of requests seems to be coming from a different region. Is that possible?
So great question. So I think let me just recap. So the point was, instead of just creating an event and notifying that something is wrong, could there an action be taken? So not today, but I think in the last slide that I just showed, the suggested operator control. So we're working on this thing, what we call as closed loop control, right? The idea is that not only can the platform detect, but also alert and take some action. So one part of the action could be to actually change the routing rule to be able to now start transferring a lot of the API workloads to another region. So that's absolutely on the horizon. Great question. Well, we really appreciate you folks taking your time and joining us out here. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Me and Adam will be around if you have any other questions, if you want to talk to us one-on-one. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thanks, guys.